Hello, and welcome to this webinar presented by World IP Review and Brandstock. I'm Peter Scott, publisher of World IP Review, and I'll be your chair for the session. In this webinar, we'll be talking about the jungle of IP ownership, how to manage your IP recordals. Specifically, we're looking at when you need to undertake a recordals project, what you need to consider when you do, and some of the best strategies for making sure it's successful. We'll also hear how it has worked in practice for two major companies. We're delighted to welcome a distinguished expert panel to share their experience with you today. Before I introduce the speakers in detail, just a bit of housekeeping. First, I'd like to thank Brandstock for its support for this webinar, and our speakers, Sandra Hammelmann from Abbott, Ingo Dauer from L'Occitane en Provence, and Anna Popova from Brandstock. Throughout the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of our speakers. Each speaker will speak, and then following those presentations, there will be a question and answer session chaired by me. If you'd like to submit questions, you can do so at any time via the field on your screen. These are submitted anonymously, but if you'd like to identify yourselves for follow-up after the webinar, please note your name in your question too. You'll also see on your screen a box for attachments. In there, you'll find documents related to the presentation. Hopefully the titles of the documents will tell you what they are, but our speakers will point you to them during the presentation too. These are available for download at the end of the webinar or throughout. Finally, we're running some polls during this webinar. They should be fairly straightforward to answer, so please do using the box on your screen. We'd like to ask you if you're planning a recordals or assignment project this year, whether you usually manage your recordals or assignments projects in-house, and what are your top priorities in a recordals or assignments project. So, to our speakers. Ingo Dauer is the Group Legal Director for L'Occitane International, a beauty care and cosmetics company with over 8,000 employees. With a wealth of experience, Ingo is able to offer unmatched insight into managing the IP rights of major multinationals. Sandra Hammelmann is the paralegal supervisor for the Trademark Group, managing Abbott's established pharmaceuticals division trademarks, with long experience in handling IP recordals, filings, maintenance, and enforcement. Anna Popova, who we will hear from first, is Director of IP Recordals at Brandstock. Anna has been in the IP Recordals area for more than 10 years and is responsible for the strategy and day-to-day operations of the IP Recordals department at Brandstock. IP Recordals is one of the largest departments, managing large-scale IP recordal projects worldwide, resulting from mergers, acquisitions, IP portfolio restructuring, and corporate entity changes. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Anna, who will take us through some background to the topic and some strategies for managing your recordals project. Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. So everybody, welcome from my side too, and thank you for attending. Thank you for your interest in this topic. So as I can imagine, some of you will be more familiar with this and have had some experience with recordals, some others not so. So I hope this webinar will give everyone some useful information and an overview basically of this special IP area. And also what I hope is to increase the awareness of its importance. Well, as Peter said, there is a question and feedback option during this webinar, so please use that, and we will be happy, or I will be happy to answer some questions at the end of the webinar. Well, then let's move forward and and see what are actually the reasons for changes in ownership. When does it become necessary to think about it? The answer is as simple as life. Life is changing, everything is changing, so do the corporates and also the IP area. In any case of mergers and acquisitions, as we all know, the IP rights usually change the ownership. But also internal reasons. We very often hear tax reasons, restructuring in the company, in a corporate, or splitting businesses, separations, or renaming the companies, changing the name or legal entity from Inc. to LLC. Also moving, like simply changing address. All that results basically in the need of updating the ownership details at the local trademark and patent offices. Well, the next question is then why it is important. the importance is has very, very many aspects, and I will just show you a few of them, or I will talk about a few of them. Basically, whatever action you need to take with regard to your IP rights, whether it is maintenance, licensing, or customs recordals, oppositions, enforcement, the ownership, correct ownership details are essential. So basically, if we turn it around, if there are some discrepancies in ownership details, you might face serious problems, run into deadlines, troubles, and basically, in a nutshell, risk your IP rights at the end. Just to give you an example, if you plan, for example, a series of new trademark filings all over the world, and there are some already existing trademarks in old owner name or even with old address, that might create you issues. You will face citations from many, many trademark offices all over the world because of this discrepancy, which means you cannot proceed with your filing and need to take care first of the ownership changes, deadlines, additional charges, office actions, things like this happen then. Well, then moving forward, what types of recordals are there out there? So independently of how they're called in the corporate itself, separation, splitting, demerger, there are basically four main types of changes that are, let's say, recognized by local trademark offices. The first and very common one is assignments. Basically, when company A sells or just transfers the assets to company B, both companies existing. Then we've got a merger. A merger is if a company merges with and into the other one and ceases to exist. The next one would be changes of name from, let's say, Brandstock AG to Brandstock Services AG. So there is a change in the name of the company. And the last one is a change of address, basically companies moving offices around. However, really often we see rather a combination of the above steps. So it's rather not that often that we only see one straightforward assignment or one straightforward merger. Very often it's a combination of the possible changes. And I just wanted to give you an example of a change that we had to deal with. And I hope I will be able to walk you through it because it was quite complicated. So we've got 6 companies involved. So the first, let's assume the first company 1, left side top, company 2, right side top, company 3, all 3 holding IP rights. And those IP rights need to go either to company 5 or to company 6, depending on, it was a split of portfolios back then. So here you can see that depending on the way, it's up to 4 steps that the IP rights need to go through. Let's take company 1 and assume that IP rights need to go to company 6. So you've got a merger first, then you've got another merger, and then a change of name. Taking company 2 and assuming the IP rights need to go to company 5 at the end. We've got there a change of name, then a merger, and then an assignment at the end. So things like this happen really, really often, especially separations, restructuring. This is a very common thing. Moving forward with this, what does it mean to manage a recordal project? First of all, of course, planning. And planning, budget planning is, I think, one of the most essential things that need to be considered. We all know that budgets are hard to get from management. So budget planning is one of the most essential ones. To be able to plan the budget, though, very important thing is to understand the change that needs to be recorded. Very often we hear like it's an assignment or transfer, and it turns out to be a change of name at the end, or even a combination of steps, which means, of course, the costs are very different. A very common split or separation scenario is the IP holding company assigning a part of the IP rights to a newly founded company and then changing the name or merging. So depending on the timing of when this assignment and change of name happens, it might be that at the end you need to record both steps for all for the IP rights that only actually needed assignment. Simply because if the assignor changes the name, there is no way to sign documents on its behalf. And trademark offices are very often very administrative driven, and they would require you to record first the change of name and then the assignment, irrespectively if that the assignment had happened actually before the name change. So things like this need to be really carefully considered before you start planning your budget for a project. The next step to plan your budget is, of course, getting prices from local associates who will help you record the changes at the trademark offices, official fees, service fees. If you have a limited budget, if you know right away that there is a some X that is available to you, you might need to renegotiate the fees to be able to fit the cost into your budget. And of course, moving forward, budget planning is a very important thing, but also as important as that is to keep the budget and to control the budget. So any incoming invoices that would come as the project starts will need to be controlled and to make sure basically that they are within the planned budget. The next very essential thing is setting priorities. Planning a worldwide recordal project really requires sitting and looking at any possible upcoming deadline that might affect the rights you're about to record changes of ownership for. Meaning any renewal deadline, any customs recordals, any planned licenses, or even existing licenses that you need to update. Any pending oppositions or other proceedings, all of that needs to be considered to make sure that you push where it needs to be pushed and you hold back until some of the proceedings, for example, have been completed so you don't jeopardize them with changing the ownership in between. Well, the next step, once all that is done and you're actually ready to go, of course, you need to instruct the local associates and explain them what to do. And then it comes to document preparation. It's a very administrative-driven task, as I already mentioned. So you will need documentation for every single jurisdiction to prove the changes so the trademark offices agree to record them. In many cases, we're talking about 2 documents per country. Let's say in average, there are countries, though, where you need multiple documents. For example, China requires 3 documents per trademark. So you can imagine if you have 500 trademarks in China, how many documents you would need to sign to execute. And of course, before you start executing the documents, you need to clarify them with the local agents to see what's necessary. If this is a special project, you need something special or something in addition. How do documents need to look like? Do they need to be notarized, legalized? Things like this. And the next step is, of course, start executing them. Notarizations, legalizations, whatever is needed for the trademark offices to accept the documents. Just to give you an example, if I take a project of around 180 countries, 25% of the documentation needed needs to be legalized either by apostille or consulate, and 35% further needs to be notarized. You can find in the attachment later, you can find a bit more detailed statistics about this, so how the documents look like in a standard 180 countries project. Well then, once you have instructed agents and everything is ongoing, it's not enough. You still need to follow up, you still need to stay on top and clarify things that come up, office actions, additional questions, anything. And we all know that sometimes local associates do require a reminder to bring the things forward, also trademark offices. So this is something that is ongoing, and you still need to stay on top. Then at some point you will get filing confirmations and recordal confirmations, basically confirming that your changes are okay and are in process or have been already recorded. And they all need to, from my experience, they all need to be checked, really, because there are typos. We're all human beings, and you see typos. There are some number tweaks, etc. And this is, of course, essential to have all the data correctly entered. So it's worth checking it, and then, if needed, have them corrected. Updates in docketing system. I think this point will ring a bell to many of you. Any changes in the IP details, anything that's happening to your IP needs to be docketed or somewhere written, saved. So the docketing is a huge burden and huge part of a recordal project. So everything needs to be updated. Even probably PDFs, confirmations need to be uploaded. So that all needs to be done down the road. And last but not least, such projects, in my experience, tend to last many years. And this is not because the instructions, etc., the processes are slow. It's just simply because some trademark offices take very long time to complete, to record the changes. To give you an example, Denmark takes 1-2 days. Venezuela will take approximately 14 years to process and record your changes, simply because they are really dramatically backlogged. So keeping overview of such a project and also reporting to your board, for example, over years, this is something really belonging to such a project to make sure it's successful. Well, I think having said all of that, I guess my message to you today is that even though recordals are often seen just as administrative task that can be dealt with at some point, they are very important indeed. They are complex and require resources and close attention to make sure they're successful. And now I'm handing over back to Peter.
Thank you very much, Anna, for that interesting introduction and presentation. A couple of notes for our audience. Just to remind you, you can ask questions at any time, and please, I would encourage you to do so. Also, thank you for those people who have participated in our first poll question, which was about whether you usually manage your recordals or assignments projects in-house. You'll have a couple more minutes to answer that question, and thereafter we'll change to the next question, which will be to ask whether you are planning a recordals or assignments project this year or not. We have had one person who said they were having trouble with the sound. I believe that is an issue at your end, whoever gave that feedback. Could you please just retry your connection if so? Without further ado then, I'm going to hand over to Sandra Hammelmann from Abbott to take us through the other side of this experience. Sandra, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to share my experience in recording IP ownership with you. I gained my experience by working in the IP field for more than 20 years for now the third company. So I have a bunch of experience gathered over the years. So, and it's more about the challenges we are facing all industries, the reply to company needs, and the managing of recordals in general. Generally speaking, we are often faced with staffing, education, and legislative issues in the respective offices, and to be honest, sometimes as well in our own departments. In our own departments, we can take care of it, of course, by ourselves. With the offices, we don't have so much influence, unfortunately. And the budget and staffing is, of course, influences the decision process significantly. How we want to take care of the recordation of the changes, whether we want to do it for the entire portfolio at once or for specific trademarks only. There are always trademarks in your portfolio you do not need anymore if you do not initiate regular culling projects. Therefore, you can start a recordation project by finding out what trademarks are still of interest for your company and transfer just the ones the company is still interested in. You can also decide to record the respective changes only when you are responding to office actions or renew a trademark. However, I made the experience that in the short run, this creates less costs than transferring the entire portfolio at once. However, in the long run, the accumulated costs are very often higher than recording the changes for the entire active portfolio. And I made the experience that over the years, the troubles resulting from the selective recordation projects are increasing. For example, you find out that you got a wrong use information and that the trademark was not transferred, that is actually in use or licensed to a third party, or the company wants to sell it to a third party, and then you have to record the changes under time pressure. The commercial group is suddenly interested in trademarks they were not interested before, and that can always happen when time goes by. And it gets more and more difficult to affect the recordals since knowledge gets lost. And you have unnecessary costs because you have to make out, legalize, and record the same documents multiple times. A further decision you have to take is whether you want to do it in-house or whether you want to use an external counsel or vendor like Brandstock. And an issue arising is, of course, the conflicting powers of attorneys, but I will talk about that later. Nowadays, we have less time available for the recordation procedures within our department. Therefore, some years ago, we decided to outsource this part of the work and give smaller projects to different vendors to test them. And we were and still are very convinced from the performance Brandstock showed and are working with them since then very closely. And we experienced some issues with conflicting powers of attorney because we are still using, of course, our regular local agents for the prosecution and renewal and the Brandstock attorneys for the assignment procedures. But we solved that by limiting the powers for Brandstock's attorneys to the recordation of the changes in the trademark ownership. That helps at least in a lot of the countries. Some are still problematic, and for those we are just taking care that the Brandstock attorney is informing us about any notices they get which do not belong to the assignment project, so we can be sure that we don't miss any deadlines. And another issue we are facing sometimes, and we all know that, at least the ones which are working in larger corporations, is that you might be informed about liquidation, merger of companies belonging to the group after the fact. This creates a challenge to our department, and so we decided to create a work stream so we get a pre-warning, and I will come back to this later. And it's also very important to have the proper documentation and the ability to sign documents, and for that reason it's really critical to make the change, to record the changes as fast as possible. And what is also very important is to keep the overview, because when you are just doing it one by one, and then it gets really tough when you have to inform your business partners, or when you are doing other assignment projects. So in the past we tracked the overview. We tracked that using just an Excel document. However, since we are working now with Brandstock, we have access to their great platform, which gives high-level as well as detailed overview about the running projects as we need them. So as promised, I'm coming back to, oh, I'm sorry. Keeping the overview, and as promised, I'm coming back to liquidation and merger of companies. Possible issues are just the lack of information. So in the past, to be honest, we were not always informed in advance of planned liquidation and merger of companies. And a further possible issue is the non-existence of authorized signatories, just caused by the fact that we weren't informed properly in advance. So this resulted in issues when we had to move the portfolio later to different entities, for example, with finding authorized signatories. However, we learned from this experience, and we established a workflow with the respective groups in the legal and tax department. And this workflow contains timelines, the contact persons in the relevant departments, and a course of action plan. So the legal and tax department are informing us now of planned changes in advance, and they are asking us whether there are trademarks in the respective corporate entities. Then we are checking this and responding to the inquiry, and we are asking back to make sure that we know the correct surviving company, or the company to which the asset shall be transferred in case there is no surviving company. And then we are preparing the respective documents so we can be sure that we get everything signed by the proper authorized representatives. So, of course, as we all know, documents evidencing title changes. There are many issues that can be created. So, for example, you are acquiring trademarks from a different company which has not recorded the past ownership changes, or the changes you are informed about happened so far in the past that no respective information can be found easily anymore. Or multiple changes happened and have to be recorded, which is also often accompanied with high translation costs, and no signatory is available anymore. to find a solution for that is not always easy, but when you analyze what happens very often, you find some common things, and you find also some proper solutions, I think. Like the check of recorded ownerships at the registries in due diligence processes, or at least immediately after the acquisition. The request of proper documentation from the seller, or even the handling of the former ownership changes by the seller, which is of course the optimal way for you as a purchaser, but that all depends on the contract. In case of multiple changes, we tend to file nowadays a notarial certificate instead of commercial extracts, and I'm coming back to this later. And signing documents sometimes by an authorized representative of the current legal owner, with the addition successor of, and then the company name, the former company name, and accompanying proof, of course, so we can still handle and manage the portfolio and the recordations. And we try to avoid filing commercial extracts because we can save time for scanning and copying the documents. We save translation costs, and also we are doing something good for the nature by saving natural resources by avoiding paper. And commercial extracts can be just 2 pages long, but sometimes they're 30, 40 pages long, so you have here some possibility to save costs and material. So many years ago, we started to use notarial certificates instead of commercial extracts. For assignments, of course, it doesn't work, but for mergers, changes of names, and changes of address, really, I think more than 90% of the countries are accepting nowadays the notarial certificates. And notarial certificate is, in case you don't work with them yet, that's a summary of the ownership changes in relation to a company from the first to the last step needed. And you will find an example how you can word that in the attachment section. Please feel free to download it after the presentation. The wording has to be provided to the notary public in the resident country with the request to print it on the letterhead and have the document notarized and legalized as necessary, because the notaries are often not used to make out such documents, so it's better to provide them with the wording. In Germany, for example, it even worked that we prepared an English translation of the steps and made the certificate already in English, which saves us costs and times in the different countries because it's easier for them to translate from English than from German. And this is already the end of my presentation. Please feel free later on to raise any questions you might have, because I know the field is so big, it's just enormous. So, and now I'm giving back to Peter.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Really interesting perspective there. Just to the audience, thank you for your participation in the second of our polls. That will shortly be changing over to the final poll, which asks, what are your priorities when you're doing a Recordals project? I'd be very grateful if you could answer that. We have a good number of questions from the audience now, but again, you still have the opportunity to ask further questions. So please do. And on that note, I will hand over to Ingo Dauer from L'Occitane on Provence to take us through his experience in this area.
Yes, hello everybody. I'm very happy to talk to you today and to share my experience with you. I hope that I'm very well understandable. I think it's important that I also share my experience as a manager and also the way how I work and how important this field of trademark portfolios and the right management of trademark portfolios is. So I work a lot in the field of M&A, mergers and acquisitions, and they work all the same. So usually you have a nice target, you have a company that is you're interested in, and you make a lot of analysis, there are a lot of financials, and on the other hand you have also a trademark portfolio which is part of the deal. So usually when an M&A case starts, then you start with a letter of interest or letter of intent. And in the letter of intent, you note the price, to make a proposal for pricing, but under suspensive conditions. And then you start usually with the due diligence. And during the due diligence, of course, you evaluate all the figures, but the trademark portfolio is very, very important as part of the deal, and you have several ways how to evaluate the trademark portfolio. But it is very important as well to check out whether the trademarks are duly registered, because you might be surprised that trademarks not only owned by one person but by several persons. And then you have to consolidate all the trademarks in order to get them transferred. This takes very often part of the time during the due diligence, apart from other aspects. After all the due diligence, then you necessarily, just hold on, I see that we move forward. Just hold on a second. Then you, of course, you draft the final agreements, and you might think about a share deal or an asset deal. In this particular case, whenever it's a share deal, I think that it's very simple, because the trademark belongs to the target company. You don't have to transfer all the assets. But it happens from time to time, and I was confronted with this problem in the past. You might have a share deal, and you might be obliged to transfer each and every asset, including the trademarks. And then the problem starts. And what is then important in case of a successful asset deal? I think you need a very good relationship, very good people around you who can actually help you to get this challenge done. To do that homework by checking out whether the ownership of the trademark holder is really clearly defined and properly administered, I think this is part of your job. And as mentioned before, there might be a couple of owners registered, and then you must restructure the deal. You might also know something about the evaluation of the costs. So sometimes it's very, very, very difficult to make an evaluation beforehand, but I think this is part of the deal. And for that reason, it is good to have a service provider who has a cost calculator, who has all the network with all the external counsels in order to make a proposal for the costs, because the handling costs for the deal, I think it's very important to have that. Whenever you transfer a lot of trademarks, the trademark portfolio, very often for cost reasons, you think about either transferring everything all together or to do it step by step, and you check out which of the trademarks are more important, which of them are less important. Yeah. And of course, each and every deal has to be done in the shortest possible time. For that reason, whenever you have an asset deal, the timing is of utmost importance. For that reason, you need a service provider, or you have internal colleagues who are able to do a very fast transfer in order not to endanger the deal. So I think that gives you an impression of the importance of the timing and the importance of getting this successfully done. I would say this is, and you have to take into consideration as well that whenever you talk about a transaction, you have also a lot of other aspects you have to think about, and trademarks are the one that must be handled correctly, because then you are relieved, you can focus on other things which come up during the due diligence and during the transaction. The issue for me is all the time, how is it able for me to work with a third-party service provider, and what is actually the key asset or the key advantage of a good service provider. I think before using a third-party service provider, I always ask myself the same question: which IT system follows up the trademark portfolio? Most of you might have your own system. We don't. We rely on an external system, IT system, for the follow-up of the trademark portfolio. It is also very important to define the interfaces between the internal IP counsels and the service provider. I say all the time that in order to make a good job, there must be a clear scope of work, because if the scope of work is not clearly defined, then things go wrong, people are demotivated because then there are overlaps. I think that those are things that need to be avoided by all means. And I think before using a third-party counsel or external counsel, I think you have to define each and every one what is actually the added value of a service provider, and when an internal IP lawyer should step in. So I think that an external counsel should be complementary to the internal IP lawyer. I think each and everyone must check out where the strengths and weaknesses of the company and of the department is, and then having analyzed the strengths and weaknesses, then each and everyone has to check out how to use them. So our approach was that we wanted to delegate pure administration to an external service provider, which is in our case Brandstock, and we take care of issues which make it necessary to have a close link to internal departments. So and whenever there is something which we can outsource, then we do that. What I want to say is that the in-house counsel must find a tailor-made solution for meeting the requirements of the internal departments, whereas it's up to the in-house counsel then also to steer and guide and manage as the external counsel, and this is not always very easy. So in a nutshell, again, the interface between external and internal lawyer is to define the strengths and weaknesses and the demands of the respective company. So those demands certainly vary in your particular case. So I think issues regarding budget have been mentioned. Very quickly, I also want to tell you how we address that issue. I think only as an example. We must also define a yearly budget. So how to do it, because you never know what comes up during the year. But there are some issues that help. First of all, we have to define the potentially upcoming demands. This is one of the issues, and on the other hand, we know for what we have spent money in the past, and according to the experience we have, then we put a budget together, and very often, we meet the budget because the figures match. And also, this is also the right opportunity to look for cost savings, and the cost savings can be on different levels. I think, first of all, I think it's always very important to improve the procedures, the internal procedures, because I think there is a lot of waste of time and money, because different people work on the same project. There are a lot of misunderstandings. So it's very important to define who is doing what, and how work can be structured in a more efficient way. And what we do on a regular basis is to review our trademark portfolio. There are most probably some trademarks which are not worth it to keep, and I think there are some of them which you can give up. So that might also help to save some costs. And we have also regular discussions with our service provider in order to find some additional improvements. So I think this is a matter of a regular update. So I think now I come to, no, it's not the last slide. About the invoice handling. This is actually also a very tough job, because how to know what might be invoiced. So very often, whenever we can, we try to fix a lump sum fee so that we have the costs under control. And we have a special computer program that follows up the costs in order to be in line with the budget. I don't know, I think each and everyone has to check out whether you have that kind of program, but it certainly helps. And whenever I work with an external service provider, for me it is imperative to get regular and timely invoicing or invoices. The worst thing that can happen, that invoices come in 3 or 4 months later, and then you didn't expect them, you have problems to integrate it in your budget. So that is very important from our side. And the biggest pleasure is at the end of the year if the budget is met. So only a very quick word about the risks which we might encounter in respect of the trademark portfolio. I think, and this is very important for us as a consumer brand, the strength of the company, and this is what you all know, is the value of the brand. And we all believe that everything must be done in order to keep the brand as strong as possible, and to defend the brand, and to make cost cutting in this respect makes sense only to a certain degree, as long as the quality of the trademark portfolio handling doesn't suffer. So whenever we make some cost cutting, we want to ensure that the quality is still there, and this is something which is for us important because it's our key asset. So I hope that it helps you. My experience helps you to consider your job a little bit differently, and I hand over now to Peter and Peter.
Thank you very much, Ingo. That was extremely interesting. We do have a few questions and a little bit of time for them. The first one, I think, is a fairly straightforward one to Sandra. Someone has asked just for clarification. What do you mean when you say commercial extract?
Yeah. In many countries, thanks Peter, in many countries a commercial registry exists, or a ministry, and the companies are registered there, and you can request an extract from the registry containing the most important details, like the addresses, the current and the former addresses, the business field, the former names and addresses of the company, the authorized signatories, and so on, and also mergers. And this helps you to prove that, to evidence the changes at the trademark offices.
Thank you, Sandra. That was fairly easy. Now, I think a question for Anna, probably. How do you organize the exchange of information with your clients? In my experience, there are always thousands of documents back and forth with external counsel. Is there a better way to do this?
Thanks, Peter. Well, I think there are two aspects of this question. First of all, organization, communication with the client. I really understand that this is a very important question to corporates, especially because they trust someone external to do the things, and are not sure how to keep track of that if they will get enough information, etc. So how we do that? First of all, we organize regular calls, especially at the beginning. It's very important to be on the same page, let's put it like this, to talk about priorities, expectations, etc. So we have calls, and we have, I believe Sandra mentioned it briefly in her presentation, that we do have an online monitoring tool for recordal projects, and this is designed specifically for the needs of such a recordal project. So this is not a super complicated docketing system, it's just about the recordal. And this is the, let's say, the most important tool also for us internally, but also for our clients to 24/7 go online and check the status, which actually is also real time. As soon as we update something on our end, the clients can see that. And of course, we're very flexible in terms of reports that might be needed extra for a client. So we're also happy to provide reports to clients that might be needed. Well, then the second part of the question was about documents. Of course, I think I partially covered it with the communication tools that we use. But the documents is a very also very important topic for that we hear from clients at least, and understandable because we're talking about hundreds of documents for such a recordation project that needs to be prepared. So what we do to make the lives of our clients easier is we take over the document preparation, including notarization and legalization processes. And for that, we only need a handful of documents from clients. One to, depending on the complexity, of course. Sometimes one document, a power of attorney, would be sufficient. Sometimes we need a few more, but that's it. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you very much, Anna. Just a reminder, we do still have a few minutes. If you haven't answered our last poll question yet, please do. Anna, I think this may be another question for you from the audience. Is it better to record ownership changes for all IP rights at once, or can it be done piecemeal as needed?
Well, great question. Question that I hear a lot, to be honest. Of course, the any ownership changes, depending on the volume, can be done in both ways. Piecemeal, for example, along with renewals, but also as a project. And I believe, again, Sandra touched it briefly in her presentation, saying that in the short run, you might even save money if you do changes piecemeal as you need them. Let's say 10 trademarks I'll do this year, so I will do the changes this year for them, and then we'll see further. In my experience, and we also had this experience indeed, it's budget-wise. So I'm talking for the first of the reasons, budget. It's absolutely correct that in the long run, it's more expensive to do changes piecemeal than do it in a project, because of economy of scale, because of possible unforeseeable official fee increases. Associates increase their fees. So this all contributes to piecemeal being more expensive. In our experience, even it can be double in long run. Then there are many other reasons. Again, risk of facing deadlines. If you have a new filing project, if you have anything, any procedures coming up and your ownership details are not up to date, and. So also one important thing is a chaos in the portfolio at the end. So if you do it piecemeal, the only hope is that it's being documented and docketed properly. Over the years, we know that stuff changes, and some people might have not updated this and that. So what I see then as a result is a portfolio where there are many discrepancies, because it's hard to keep an overview of a big portfolio when doing changes, piecemeal. Speaking about that, to give you a bit more, if you're interested in more information about this, there is a great white paper we published about this topic specifically. It's called 7 Reasons to Do Recordals as a Project, and you can always download it from the Brandstock website.
Thank you very much, Anna. Also, did you just want to mention about your attachment about?
Oh yeah, Peter, thank you. Thank you for reminding me. This is something I forgot during my presentation. One attachment I mentioned, this is about the document requirements. How do they need to be notarized, legalized, etc. The other document is about a recordal time frame. So how long does it take to finalize a recordal project in a standard 180 project. So you're welcome to also download this one to have a few more numbers there.
Thank you very much, Anna. Well, I think that is about as much time as we have, so we'll wrap it up there. Thanks very much for tuning in. Just a reminder, if you have any questions about that presentation, you should be able to see on your screen contact information for Anna, for Brandstock in general, and indeed Brandstock's website at www.brandstock.com. This webinar will be available on demand for the next 12 months, so please do forward it on or share it with anyone you think would be interested. And please also leave feedback through the box on your screen. Finally, it just remains for me to thank our speakers again, Sandra Hammelmann, Ingo Dauer, and Anna Popova, and to thank Brandstock for their support. Please keep your eyes open for future webinars from WIPR. We hope you'll join us next time. Thank you.